Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today's guest is one of the most versatile artists in the UK. He started out as an actor and television presenter. Then he burst onto the music scene in 1986, representing the UK in the Eurovision Song Contest with his first hit song, No Easy Way to Love. In 1989, he and Paul Varney formed the British pop duo Yell. They were eventually signed by Simon Cowell's Fanfare record label, and they released 3 hit singles, Instant Replay, One Thing Leads to Another, and Let's Go Round Again. Their album, entitled Let's Go, featured 3 ballads written by our guest. After the duo went their separate ways, he resumed his acting career in the US and the UK, appearing in films and TV shows including Bad Girls, Coronation Street, Eastenders, Doctors, Apartment for 8, and many more. Most recently, he's returned to his first love, singing and songwriting. He had 2 top 20 Heritage Chart hits with his songs Set Your Spirit Free and Don't Want to Lose That Girl. And now, on October 21st, he's releasing his brand new single, Do You Remember Me? Here's a few bars to whet your appetite. I'm delighted to welcome Daniel James to our show. Daniel, thank you so much for being here.
Harvey, thank you so much for having me. And what an introduction. I need to pay you to come around with me. When I go shopping, I want you to walk in the store before me and announce me. That is one heck of an announcement. Thank you. My mother will be sending you some money, I think.
Well, it's my pleasure. Daniel, I want to start by clearing something up. When I look at your acting credits, you're known by the name of Colin Haywood. And as a musician, you're known as Daniel James. But Colin Haywood and Daniel James are actually the same person, correct?
Well, there's a story. As always in this industry, there's a story. I was born, my mum called me Colin. The thing is, and my dad was called Haywood. I was going to be called Daniel James. My granddad was a shipwright carpenter. I was going to be called after Granddad James. And my mum's uncle was called Daniel. So I was going to be called Daniel James, obviously Daniel James Haywood. Years later, I'm on Children's BBC presenting a TV series, and I ended up getting into this pop group, and we had George Michael's publicist, Connie, and she was sitting there and she was saying, Daniel, well, at that time she said, Colin, she said, there are so many people in the industry doing well at the moment with the same name as you, Haywood. There was Nick Haywood. There was lots of Haywoods around at the time, Justin Haywood. She said, I'm really having a problem when I'm calling people up to get the group on magazine covers, and it's a real hassle. She said, have you got a middle name? And I said, well, the name I was going to use was Daniel James. And she looked at me, and without a word of a lie, she went, dark eyes, dark hair, you are Daniel. I christen you. And I rang, so she got my mum on the phone, and my mum was laughing at the other end of the phone, and she said, I want to change your son's name. And my mum said, well, I was going to call him Daniel anyway, so go for it. So I actually legally changed my name. So there's a few old credits, TV acting credits in the name of Colin Haywood, but nobody's called me Colin Haywood for decades. So I hope that clears it up for everyone.
Now, who were the musicians and songwriters who inspired you when you were growing up?
Burt Bacharach, Hal David and Burt Bacharach, the whole Mamas and the Papas, Crosby, Stills and Nash, Fleetwood Mac. I like songs that tell stories. And when you look back at the Brill Building with Neil Sedaka, all those writers that were in the Brill Building on Broadway, and they were disciplined every day to knock out the hits. And obviously, occasionally there was one that was a little bit cheesy, but on the whole, they came out with the most amazing songs that have been people's life. They've lasted through people's lifetimes, and they all just appeal to me. Of course, obviously, the Beatles were really before my time. Paul McCartney and Wings. I loved the Paul McCartney and Wings, obviously some of John Lennon's solo stuff as well. But yeah, I think on the whole, it's composers. strangely enough, for somebody that's been in the theatre, I've never really been big into show tunes, apart from one lady, Barbara Streisand.
I was intrigued by the fact that even though you're a really great songwriter, Simon Cowell wanted you and Paul to record covers of other people's hits, like Instant Replay, which was first recorded by Dan Hartman. That must have been very frustrating for you.
Oh, you've read my mind. Listen, Dan Hartman, what a talent. I would love to have worked with Dan Hartman. You know, he also wrote and produced for so many people. There are people in this industry I would love to have worked with. Definitely Burt Bacharach, definitely Dan Hartman. What a talent. When the band got together, I'd been presenting on Children's BBC every morning, and a guy used to come into the office called Jeff Chegwin. And Jeff Chegwin's brother was a big celebrity in the UK. They were twins, and Jeff's sister was as well. She used to present Top of the Pops. And he was what was called a plugger, and he would come in every week trying to get his bands on the show. So I didn't really know him. Anyway, we chatted, and on the last day of shooting the series, I was going up an escalator at Shepherd's Bush Tube Station in London, and Jeff was clomping down, and I was clomping up, and we both looked at each other at the same time and laughed. And I said, Jeff, what are you doing? He said, well, my office is just around the corner. It's in Nomis building. And Nomis was where all the big bands like The Who, The Stones, all the big bands rehearsed there. And he said, what are you doing? I said, well, I've just shot the last episode of the season. And he said, what are you going to do next? And I said, Jeff, I'm going to go back to what I love the most. I'm going to go back to writing songs and singing. And he said, I didn't know you did that. I thought you were a TV presenter. And I said, no, that was my first passion. So he said, come and see me. So the next week, I toddled off over to Nomis. And of course, I walk in there, and the creme de la creme of the music industry is in there. And they've got this most beautiful cafe in there, and it's just covered with discs, and it's just fabulous. And they're all sitting around, and I'm sitting there having my cup of tea. And Jeff comes down, and we start chatting. And I played him some of my music. He said, Daniel, you write great songs. He said, the problem is at the moment, there are so many solo artists. He said, but we don't have any duos. He said, I've got a guy, I'd like to introduce you to him. So if you get on with him, maybe you could work with him. So I met up with the other guy, and we gelled and we got on. And seriously, for the next year, I went round to Paul's parents' house and just wrote songs. So I would turn up at Paul's with all these song ideas about relationships I'd had and all that kind of stuff. Paul was a good keyboard player and engineer, so it was very easy for me to take all the ideas in. And we basically came up with an album's worth of material. And Jeff got us out on the road. And on a Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night, which are really big nights in the UK, we played clubs and bars, and we learned our trade. We also learned about timing and delivery and what songs worked, what songs didn't. And then he introduced us to a lady who did something called the Lunch Club. And the Lunch Club went around schools at lunchtime. And when everybody had had their lunch, the sports hall or the assembly hall curtains would open, and we'd be standing there and we'd do a gig for them. The best thing about that, we worked so hard running around the country. I was so thin. When we used to turn up at the schools, all the ladies that did the lunches would say, boys, you look so thin. We'll save you lunches. And they would pile, we'd get the best food ever. You know, we'd finish, we just want to race through the gig to get the lunches, you know, and those school desserts with the custard and the sauces and oh my God, it was just, you know, chocolate chip cookie galore. So that kept us going. So after about 2 years of writing and performing, Jeff said, it's time to do a showcase. And years ago, it was probably the same in Canada and the States. Bands and artists did showcases in front of record companies. So loads of record companies turned up at Nomis, and it was a Thursday night. I distinctly remember it. And we did the showcase, and 2 record companies were interested. CBS, who became Sony, and Fanfare Records, which was Simon. And we had a meeting, Jeff, Paul, and I, and in all honesty, I didn't want to sign with Simon. Not because he was a bad guy, but I saw myself as a singer-songwriter. And I knew that Simon had a girl called Sunita, who did lots of cover versions and had hits. And I didn't want to go down that route. And basically, I was strong-armed, as you say, by the other 2, and we went with Simon. And in all honesty, as soon as we signed with Simon, there was money galore, because we got great clothes, we got a stylist. And on the second day, I said to Simon, Simon, in all honesty, you know, it's not working, can we? And he was great. You know, we got rid of the stylist. We chose our own clothes. But we had 30 magazine covers just for the first single. We were on TV everywhere. But I said to Simon, you know, we've written these songs, and Simon listened to the songs, but I don't think he really understood the singer-songwriter thing. He was just very into covers, but he was also a very shrewd businessman. And I think in Simon's mind, he knew if he got a couple of quick hits, that maybe then we could branch out. And so Simon and I would butt heads all the time, not in a nasty way, but I'd be going in, playing in new songs and playing them and saying, you know, how about that for a single? How about this for a single and whatever? And the poor guy, you know, he must have seen me, you know, I must have come through the office door and he must have thought, oh, here we go again, you know, he'd be sitting with his feet up. So Simon and I were continually butting heads. We were doing gigs, we were having photo sessions. Anyway, we were exhausted and we went off on holiday to Ibiza, and we were in a bar, Paul and I, and it was about 2 a.m. The dance floor was deserted because it was kind of late and a bit chill out. Suddenly we heard 10, 9, 8, and the Dan Hartman version of Instant Replay came on, and it's got a lot of percussion at the beginning, tom-toms, and fantastic. I mean, just a talent. And I watched, and the floor filled up not just with women, guys got up as well. And you know you're on a winner if women like it and guys like it too, you know. And I looked at Paul and I said, I really don't want to do a cover, but if we do a cover, this has got to be the one. So we go back to London. Simon is in the office sitting at his desk, and of course Simon's, you know, always got a suntan, always looks like James Bond's brother. He'll kill me for saying that because he wants to be James Bond. So he's sitting there at the desk. He's got his feet up on the desk, the boots, the heels, suntan resplendent, with a book in his hand. So I said, guess what? And he said, what? I said, I've got some good news for you. And he kind of smiled because, you know, he thought I was going to say, I've got another song I've written, you know. So I said, we found the song. We found a cover version. Well, he swung his legs off the table. He had a leather chair, swung his legs off. They banged on the floor and the book fell out of his hand. So I bent down to pick the book up, and he said, Daniel, while you were there, open the page. And he said a number of a page. Well, I picked the book up and it actually fell open, and he turned the page over of a book. He said, take a look at the song. The night before, Simon used to sleep with what's called the Guinness Book of hit singles under his pillow. And he'd picked that song the night before, knowing that we were going in. So when I saw that, I just thought, you know what, Daniel, you've had all these doubts, all these concerns. It must be meant to be, because I'm a great believer in fate. So we smiled, we shook hands, and he said, now we need to find a producer. Well, I'd worked at Top of the Pops as a cheerleader, and I'd done the warm-up. And I remember a group called Shack Attack. They were like a jazz funk band, but the guy in it had been their producer, Nigel Wright, really talented guy. I suggested Simon along with Jeff. So about a week later, we turned up at Fanfare again. Of course, Simon's Porsche is in the driveway, you know, resplendent. And then this big, old, fabulous American car, like the car they have in Greece, pulled up. Nigel's in the car, and I looked and I thought, these two are a match made in heaven. They're car maniacs. So Nigel comes in, everyone gets on like a house on fire. We go in the studio and record the track. Simon comes down to the recording. We'd already been in the studio a couple of hours with Nigel, and we'd recorded what we thought was a fantastic version of Instant Replay. He came in and he sat there and he said, well, boys, play me what you've got. So Nigel put it on. Well, there was silence. And I looked at Paul, Paul looked at me, and Simon had a very troubled look on his face. And I thought, uh-oh, here we go. He hates it. We're finished. That's it. It's the end. We're out the door. And he said, boys, he said, I've got an idea. He said, I'd like you to sing it in falsetto. Falsetto? Well, you can imagine, you know, I didn't want to be a cover artist. I didn't want to sing in falsetto. You know, can you imagine, you know, spending 5 years of your life. So I thought, well, I was panicking by then. So Paul and I went back in the booth. Nigel got the track ready to play. And we kind of moved out the way of the glass partition. And I said to Paul, the only way we're going to get out of this is if we look like we really are enjoying it and we mean it, but we do the worst job ever. But we've got to look like we're not doing it on purpose. So the track comes on, and I said to Paul, whatever you do, don't look at me, I won't look at you because we'll laugh, you know? So the track comes on, 10, 9, and of course I've got the first few lines. So the first few lines come on and I have to steel myself. Believe me, there were cats turning up at the door wanting to leave, you know? And I sang the whole of my lines, but not in key, not in tune. It was like a Yale key. And Paul did the same. Well, what the worrying thing was, it was going on and on and on. And in my head, I'm thinking, he likes it. We're stuck with this forever. So I'm progressively getting more sharp and more sharp. We get to the middle eight, and suddenly there's a bang on the mixing desk. And we looked to the mixing, we hadn't dared look while we were singing. And Simon's sitting there like this, with the sternest look on your face. Now, bear in mind, we were young, we'd only been signed to him a while. And as much as I had, I was reluctant to sign with them, I didn't want to lose the deal just as we got it. So Paul and I looked at each other and went out, and I thought, oh my God, we've had it now. So we walked out and he's just looking at us like this. And I think, we've blown it. He knows what we've done. 10 seconds went by and he cracked the biggest smile you've ever had. And he laughed and he said, boys, you were right. It sounded terrible. Well, my shoulders dropped. We went back in, we knocked it out the park, and the rest is history. So yes, I have pulled the wool over Mr. Cowell's eyes.
Now that's a story for the ages, I'll tell you. Now, you mentioned already you used to be a cheerleader and a warm-up artist for Top of the Pops in the 80s. I can't even imagine the thrill for you when you got to star in the show when Instant Replay became a big hit.
Harvey, you don't know me, but your questions are amazing. I used to turn up they'd shoot it on a Wednesday and it would go out on a Thursday night. So when I was young, I would go in every morning. There'd be 4 stages and there'd be a yellow shooting script. And I would just immediately go through it to see who was on. Duran Duran, Spandau Ballet, even Mick Jagger came in, the kids from Fame. I mean, anybody who was anybody was on there. That show was the biggest show. It was Thursday night, 7:30, and he got, like in the UK, 20 million viewers every week. It was huge. To work on it as a cheerleader was a thrill. To do the warm-up and get the kids going was another thrill. Kim Wilde, they all came in. Boy George, Culture Club. I warmed everybody up for them. It was 9-10 years later, I walked back in the studio. When you see somebody run 100 meters at the Olympics, when you see somebody win a boxing match, you see the swimmer touching the touchline and they've won the gold medal. I'm telling you, when you see people go to Buckingham Palace and they get the knighthood or the OBE or the gong, I'm telling you now, the thrill of my life. And I'm not under or overestimating it. I walked in that studio and thankfully I knew the crew. There were other cheerleaders there I'd worked with when I'd been there, and everyone was so nice. When I was a cheerleader, Cliff Richard used to come in and sit and chat with us, The artists would come and sit and chat. DJs would come and sit and chat. And here I was, a kid who'd sat on a fence with his girlfriend when he was 16, singing songs on a fence where she lived in a farm. I'd made it. I was there.
You felt like a champion.
You certainly did. You summed it up perfectly.
Well, Daniel, you've spoken publicly and very courageously about how sudden and painful and traumatic it was for you when Yale broke up. Looking back, is there anything you wish you would have done differently back then?
Yes. Another great question, Harvey. When Yale broke up, it happened overnight. There were things going on behind the scenes I didn't know anything about with the record company, politics. And I woke up one morning, bear in mind, I've just told you about the first 2 years of our hard slog. When you love something, you work your backside off. Well, then we had another couple of years of flying all over the world. And I wouldn't have missed it for the world. It was the best thing ever. When you see bands that dwarfed me in success, people like One Direction or New Kids on the Block, when they say they got burnout, what happens is when record companies see you're doing well, they want to cash in because they've invested loads of money in you. They want to get their money back and lots more. So, they kind of work you too hard, really, and they never give you days off. So consequently, I hadn't had a day off in 4 years, and I was absolutely drained. I was elated, but when your adrenaline is going so much, you do suffer from burnout. Anyway, I woke up one morning getting ready to go off and do yet more recording and TV work. And I opened a tabloid and it said, Yell dead, Yell bite the dust. And I genuinely, I was on my own, no family with me. I picked up the phone, nobody answered the phone. I walked the floor, I didn't know what to do. You know, there's no HR for pop stars. I didn't know Elton John, you know, since my breakup with the band, you know, going down and ending with the record company, Elton John's come out publicly and fantastically, what a great guy. There's been several people in the business that when they've had hard times, when things have happened to them badly, he's kind of taken them under their wing. I didn't know Elton John. You know, if I'd had Elton's phone number, I'd have been around there like a shock. There's no union you can go to. It's not like a normal job. I genuinely couldn't get hold of anybody for days. And I had no power. So 1 minute you're on the TV. I had, listen, the morning I opened the magazine, the tabloid, there were people out, people used to sleep and be out. When my mum and dad came to visit me, there would be fans outside my house 24/7. You know, I had the newspapers going through my dustbins. It's the typical life of somebody in the industry. I'm looking out the window thinking, they don't know, you know. And then, of course, eventually I go down and they do know. And they then tell me that they'd heard a rumor before I had. How stupid did I feel? So consequently, I lost the home I was going to buy my parents. I lost nearly everything because everything went. And I then had a nervous breakdown, and I'm not ashamed to say it. And the thing that I wish I'd done is talk to people, because I took it so personally. I blamed myself. I mean, I hadn't done anything. I mean, you know, it was stuff going on that I knew nothing about. I think the feeling of not being able to do anything about it. You know, when some people say they had a terrible dream where they were falling and they were trying to reach and they couldn't stop themselves from falling. That was the kind of thing that I felt I was living through, because I was powerless to stop it.
Well, let me ask you this, Daniel. When I look back at your career, especially in the early days with Yell, when you were working nonstop with so much pressure on you, I'm wondering what kind of a toll it took on young artists like yourself in terms of your mental health. Did any of your managers or producers care about giving you even a little time off to catch your breath?
I don't think that kind of thought was in vogue in those days. It just, you know, nowadays, what I went through would never have happened. You know, there would have been gaps in the schedule. There would have been, you know, people would have cared a little more. People would have probably recognized that I was suffering from exhaustion. You know, listen, I'm going to be really honest. I wasn't working down a mine. I know that people work physical, hard jobs like my granddad did on a shipyard. And I'm not comparing my life to that. But what I am saying is, when you dedicate yourself something to, when it is your whole life and it's your living and it's your passion and you live it 24/7, it's very hard to lose it overnight. There's no adjustment period. And I don't think it would happen nowadays. I think people nowadays look out for symptoms. But I was suicidal. I was a broken man. And I had a breakdown. I stayed with my parents for a while, and I completely I don't even want to say let go of the industry. Well, the industry didn't let go of me.
Well, the music industry let go of you, but you resumed your acting career and you did very, very well. You were living and working in Los Angeles. Did you enjoy acting as much as being a music artist?
Well, I had the breakdown and I eventually pulled myself together, and I went actually first to New York. Yell had recorded in LA. We'd recorded with Michael J, who produced and written for Martika and loads of artists. We'd been to the Grammys, you know, we'd never released anything in the States, which in a way was quite fortunate, because when I was licking my wounds and quite a broken shell of a man, I went to New York. And as everybody knows, you know, New York's like walking on a movie set. You know, when you come from London, when, you know, the tallest building is half the size of anything in New York, you know, you walk down the avenues, it's amazing. So I lost myself in New York. Nobody knew who I was. And more importantly, nobody gave a damn. So I lost myself in New York. One night I was walking, it was snowing. It was February, freezing cold. I was walking up 34th Street. A guy came around the corner. We smacked into each other. Typical Brit. I jumped back and I went, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry." And he said, you're a Brit. You're English. And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "I don't suppose," he said, "it's a long shot." He said, you don't act." And I laughed and I said, "Well, I do actually, or rather I did." And he said, "Well," he said, "we're rehearsing something I've written and we're thinking of workshopping it. Would you, there's a part missing. We're all Americans. There's one Brit in it. Would you come and read with us?" Long story short, I went and read with them, thought nothing of it. 3 days later, I was living in Queens at the time, and he rang me up, left a message. I met him in Manhattan, and he said, "We're going to workshop it for the whole of the summer, and then we're going to perform it off Broadway. Would you come and do it?" And I jumped at it. I moved to Chelsea. I walked from Chelsea right up to 54th Street. Every night we rehearsed from 5 till 10 in like a walk-up rehearsal studio with the metal stairs outside. It's like something from a James Dean, story. It was amazing. But that process healed everything in here. I totally forgot who I'd been. Nobody cared. And you know what? I didn't care, because I was being fed. I was being creative with lovely people. I was stretching myself creative. That performance came and went. I went to LA. I was in an episode of a TV series called Passions for NBC. I did an internet series called Apartment for 8. And I loved LA. I mean, I love the States. I think I may have mentioned to you, when I was a teenager, I always felt as if I was born on the wrong continent. I loved everything American.
I think it would be great if you could combine acting and music by starring in a TV show like Glee, where you could do both. What do you think of that?
Well, if only Ryan Murphy was watching,
He might be.
That genius, Ryan Murphy, how many TV shows has that guy done that are amazing? I would love that. I mean, I'm sure there's a role for for a teacher. I could play a teacher. I could play a dad. I can't play the young kid anymore. But the great thing about not being able to play the young kid anymore is you bring all the experience with you, and it's fabulous. Listen, I would love it. If anybody's watching and they're writing a drama, producing a TV drama with songs and music in it, then get in touch with the wonderful Harvey, and he'll give you my number. So I did that stuff in LA, and I was having a great time. I intended to stay there. But my mum and dad had me very late in life, and my mum and dad were old and they were ill. And I actually came back to England to look after my mum. And I put everything, and you're gonna think, "Gee, Daniel, have you got a death wish?" You give up, your career's taken from you as a pop star. You then come back as an actor. Then you put that on ice to look after your mum. But I don't care. And it's not arrogance that says that, but my mum needed me. And
Oh, absolutely. I don't think anyone would criticize you for that. And besides, you believe in destiny, so you know that the universe has a plan for you, and that was part of it.
Well, I didn't think that at the time. I actually genuinely, I mean, I don't know, maybe it was arrogance, as you say, or maybe destiny thinking in the back of my mind, I'll just jump back into that. Well, you know what? It's not easy to jump back into it. I looked after my mom for 10 years. I wouldn't have missed it for the world. We had a ball. You see, I was the last child. There's a huge gap between me and my brother. So when they were way off at school as a little boy, I was at home with my mom. So, we were pals. So when I came to look after her, I was paying her back for all the great things she'd done with me.
Now, as I mentioned in my introduction, you competed in the Eurovision Song Contest back in 1986. What do you think of TV talent shows like Britain's Got Talent and American Idol and The Voice?
Well, when I did the Song for Europe, it was all the public voting. And the one good thing about these new talent shows, it's the public. They've changed the Eurovision now. Record industry people pick them. But in those days, it was the public. And I do like the public having a choice. And I know when American Idol and Pop Idol came out, there were a lot of people in the industry that were a bit sniffy about it. I think they've gotten used to it now, because I think it kind of gives some people an opportunity that maybe they would never have gotten. I'm a little bit dubious about the big record companies, and I wonder about the record deals that people get. and about, you know, what percentage the artist is getting. And I would be very interested to find out what kind of deals the artists get. But on the whole, I do like the idea that the public choose people.
Daniel, you resumed your music career during the pandemic, starting with a song called Set Your Spirit Free, followed by Don't Want to Lose That Girl. Where did you get your inspiration from to write songs during the lockdown?
I was on my own in London during lockdown, and I used to go out for a walk every night. And I walk right up to the north of London to Alexandra Palace, and I walk quite quickly. And one afternoon, there were lots of care homes had been on the news, because obviously in the first lockdown, we religiously watched the news. There were bulletins, and they were showing pictures of people in senior centres and care homes. And I remember seeing this lady put her hand up against the screen because she couldn't see her family, couldn't hold them. And the daughter put her hand up against the glass of the home, and she couldn't go in. And it was heartbreaking to watch. And I was out walking one night, and out of nowhere, I hadn't written a song in decades. I started to, these words came in my head. When the world turns its head, there are people around me with their hearts in their mouths, not knowing the right way they should turn. And suddenly these words just came out. I turned on my heels, I sprinted home, I got my phone and I sang it in the phone. I went to bed, got up the next morning, listened to it. I was out that night for another walk. So basically for the whole of lockdown, I just went walking. It kept me fit and lean, but I wrote songs again. Where did they come from, Harvey? I don't know. I think from just watching what was going on around us. There were 3 couples. When halfway through lockdown, things were eased. And when you could go out for a walk, you could go with people, but you had to be 6 feet apart. I went out with different couples, 30-year-old, 40-year-old, 80-year-old, and they told me of how difficult it had been during lockdown. And the 3 couples were partly on the verge of breaking up. And I went home and I wrote a song about it, because the elderly, well, I'm going to say to you, the 30-year-old, the 40-year-old, and the 80-year-old couple, do you think that any of those couples broke up after lockdown?
Probably the 80-year-old couple.
Well, you're exactly right, Harvey. The lady said to me, we married him in the war. I should never have married him. The war brought us together. I've wanted to leave him so many times. The lockdown was the final straw. But the guy said to me, when I used to fly off in the Air Force, I used to carry a picture inside my pocket and show my friends, this is my girl. And he said, I don't want to lose my girl. So I went home and wrote the song about, I don't want to lose my girl. So I tend to write about things I see or things that have happened to me. And I basically put them all on Spotify, never thinking anything would happen. All the local radio stations during lockdown became 10 times more successful. People stayed home and listened to the radio. All these radio DJs were looking on Spotify for people they hadn't played. They saw me, connected it with Yell, started playing instant replay, Let's Go Round Again, and then playing my new stuff. Within a couple of months, I was getting phone calls. Would you appear on this show, appear on that? And then Mike Reed, who was a hugely famous DJ and TV host and poet in England, put together a chart called the Heritage Chart. And it's for artists who were successful in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. My record started appearing in the chart. Set Your Spirit Free zoomed in the top 20. I found myself doing TV interviews and radio interviews and magazine interviews, and I'm in a chart again. Harvey, I pinched myself.
Destiny. Destiny.
Well, that's where I am today. I had 2 hits last year and then took some time out to kind of get my thoughts together. And then I wrote the new song, Do You Remember Me?
Well,
Possibly.
Before we get to that, I just have to mention, when I was doing my research for this interview, I learned that in addition to being a musician, you're a fitness instructor. And during the pandemic, you helped people maintain their physical fitness and their mental and emotional well-being. Tell us a little bit about that. I think that's fascinating.
Well, during lockdown, there were a lot of care homes with people in there, as I say, who they got no visitors. So I got in touch with some care homes near where I live. And I said, I know I can't come in, but if you can fix Zoom up, we can do some exercises, chair-based exercises to music. Well, it turned into almost like chair-based exercises and choir, because I got on the Zoom. Harvey, there were people sitting there that had not had a visitor for months.
Oh.
You know, these people were, they were like this. I started the music, and I did Sinatra, I did the Bee Gees, I did a whole spectrum. And I'm seeing, well, you can't see my foot, but the feet were tapping, the heads were raising. The first week, the first 10 days, I would do it a couple of times a week, different care homes. Listen, by 2 weeks, their heads were raised, they were singing along. And then what I did was I then said to them, are there any songs that you'd like? And the care homes were coming back to me saying, this is like medicine, because when they finished, they're eating their meals now because they had no appetite before, and they're sleeping better. I mean, maybe my record sent people to sleep, but the exercise was doing them good, and mentally it was stimulating them. So during lockdown, I went on Zoom, and you know what, Harvey? It did me good as well, because I ended up not just sitting, I'd be standing, doing stuff. Of course, I slipped a couple of my own tracks in there as well. We had a good old sing-song right across the board. And it was quite sad, actually, because when lockdown ended, they stopped doing it. But a load of the care homes said, you've given them like medicine. So that was a thrill.
I think there's a song there, Daniel. I hope you write a song about the healing power of music and about the need for people who are in care homes to get that kind of stimulation and entertainment.
Maybe you're right. Yeah. I mean, I kind of did it, and then the records took off, and it's not that I forgot about it, but my head is so full, but I never thought about, yeah, you're right. You know, I think probably at some point I might visit a couple of the care homes and just see how they are now.
Yeah, there's definitely a song there, but you are here to talk about your brand new song being released October 21st called Do You Remember Me? I understand you were inspired to write the song after seeing one of your exes in a store?
Only could happen to me, Harvey. I was in a store quite a while ago, and I saw my ex right across the store. And I was leaning over the frozen department, and she was quite a way over, so she didn't see me. The relationship had kind of ended okay. I mean, I'd ended it, but it hadn't ended horribly. You know, we'd kind of run our course. But I'd been the one that ended it. And you know what? I kind of looked, and all these little pictures, just 30 seconds, these little pictures in my head of the great times we'd had rushed past my mind. And I thought, did I do the right thing? Gee, I might have made a mistake. And of course, it sounds like I'm thinking about it for ages, but I wasn't, because within a couple of seconds, the other thoughts of why I did break up came into my mind. But that night, I went out with some mates, girls and guys, and we were all sitting having a few drinks and chatting. And I told them, do you know what? They all had a story about bumping into an ex. Some good, some very bad, some, you know, slapping them across the face, some saying you haven't been to see the kids and paid money, some kind of okay, but everybody had a story about bumping into an ex. So I came home and I was lying in bed, and I actually came up with the song in my head. You know, the things we had are over now. I've got to let them go. I hope in time we'll realize that leaving was the best for us both. Jumped out of bed, got the phone out, whacked it down, and God knows what my neighbors think of me, because I am literally the 2 a.m. boy jumping out of bed, running, singing a song in the phone and going back to bed. And that is Do You Remember Me?
Where can people download your music?
Spotify, Amazon, iTunes, Deezer, it's everywhere, thankfully. And also, they can watch the Heritage Chart Show on TV or online. And I would love it if people would kindly vote. Do You Remember Me is doing really well. And if anybody would like to go to theheritagechart.co.uk, press vote now, scroll down, Daniel James, Do You Remember Me? Give it a little tick and press submit. I would be very grateful.
Yes, I did it before the interview, and I'm encouraging all our viewers to please vote for Daniel James, Do You Remember Me, on the Heritage Chart. Daniel, I know you're really busy writing and recording your own songs now, but do you think you'll ever go back to recording any covers?
Maybe somewhere. It's really weird. Harvey, you're almost psychic today. I had a meeting with the record producer yesterday, who hopefully I'm going to be working with. And he said the same thing to me. He said, have you thought about doing any covers? And I looked at him. Bear in mind, this guy has worked with the biggest stars, you know, really big. I mean, you know, makes me look like a pixie or a dwarf. He asked me that, and I looked at him and I went, oh. I said, well, I've done 2. And he went, oh yeah. He said, instant replay, Let's Go Running. He said, I'd forgotten. He said, but would you consider it? And I said, you know what? maybe a standard or two, and maybe a Burt Bacharach, a Hal David, or one of those. But what you've got to remember is the biggest of stars have covered those songs. So only do them if you can bring something different to them.
Well, here's the thing. Your voice has matured over the years. And I think that the way you're singing now gives your songs more gravitas than when you were part of Yell. Do you know what I mean?
Well, again, the guy yesterday said, he said, you've got a great range. He said, I want to explore the lower register of your voice as well if we work together. He says, I want to explore the lower register. He said, because you can do low and high. He said his favorite song of mine is Set Your Spirit Free. And he said, the reason I like it is the verses have got a lovely low timbre. And he said, on the most recent one, you're singing in your higher register. So who knows, Harvey? Do you know what, Harvey? I think you should have a crystal ball. Your questions are everything that's going on in my life at the moment.
Well, when I listen to your old records and then I listen to you sing now, I think your voice is actually better than it's ever been. Don't you think?
Well, it's nice of you to say. I'll just hope it lasts. That's all. I'm doing my best.
Do you think there's any chance that you and Paul Varney might get back together one day and record a couple of songs?
Well, as Paul, Paul's kind of left the performing industry, as he said himself. He prefers behind the scenes. He's not into performing. So he's left that side of the industry. And it's up to me to carry the flag, and I'll do my best.
Well, one of the things that makes you really special, in my opinion, is that you have a very loyal fan base. You've got fans who followed your career and have supported you from the very beginning, haven't you?
It's amazing. I genuinely have. I had a little reunion. When the first single went in the Heritage Chart last year, we had a little reunion along the Thames. And, can you imagine how fantastic that was for me to meet up with the fans? And the good thing is, not only do they like the new stuff, but their kids quite like the new stuff as well. So it's a win-win for me. I've got old fans, and also through Mike Reed's Heritage Chart and his radio show, which goes all over the world, and the Heritage Chart TV show and shows like yours, I'm getting fans from across the world, and it's fantastic.
Well, I'm so glad you're having success with your new string of hits. And I have a feeling, Daniel, that with the music industry being what it is now, where independent artists don't need the big record companies in order to make it big, I have a feeling you're well on your way to having great success as a music artist and finally having total control over your career, which is really important for you and really terrific.
I was in the car, Harvey, listen to this. Psychic Harvey. I was in the car last night, seriously, and I said to the person, when I got back in the car after the meeting, they said, how did it go? And I said, it almost feels like this is the career I should have been having as a singer-songwriter when I first started. So
it's just that with the experience you had, it gave you a richness, it gave you a soulfulness. It not only impacted your voice, it's impacted your songwriting. And I think at one point, here's the crystal ball again, at some point, you're going to write the definitive song that totally allows the audience to embrace and understand what you went through when Yell ended. You are only beginning to tap into that insight into yourself, but you're going to write the classic song about the industry. You wait and see.
Well, I hope so. It'll either be that or a book.
Well, I don't see why you can't do both, but I want to tell our viewers that you can download Daniel James' music on all of the popular streaming platforms. You can also follow his career and find out everything that's happening by going to his website, thedanieljames.com. Well, Daniel, it's been such a pleasure having you on the show. I wish you the best of luck with the new single and continued success with your career. Thank you so much for taking the time to appear on our show.
Harvey, it's been an absolute pleasure. Your questions have been amazing. Your viewers are lucky. Your show, great questions. Thank you. Thank you to your listeners. And can I just say cheers to everybody? I'm going to have a cup of tea now.
Our guest has been singer-songwriter Daniel James. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you to our producer, Steve Silver, and to my entire team in LA, and to Steve Osborne, Darren J., and my team in the UK. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out all the great interviews on the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted.